Music, heavy, modern, cinematic drone hits. There is a 22-story tower in the heart of Dubai that has been standing for over 2 decades on a wedge of sand that every major developer in the Emirates initially refused to touch. It was built in a radical, razor-sharp shape that critics openly stated would never survive the intense summer heat expansion or the brutal Arabian Gulf windstorms. Today, it has appeared in more luxury lifestyle campaigns than almost any other structure in the Middle East. It has been photographed more times than almost any building in downtown or the marina. And it is one of only 2 towers in this entire investigative file that I can tell you with absolute confidence has never sunk, never leaked, and never developed a dangerous structural lean. The other one? It is located right on the edge of the marina. It cost a staggering $2 billion, was completed recently, and is already facing multi-million-dollar lawsuits over glass fatigue and structural shifting. But this specific tower was finished in the early boom years for a fraction of that cost in real terms. It was designed by a visionary British architect who insisted on anchoring its foundation directly into the deep, solid bedrock of the UAE, at a time when most regional developers didn't even bother, choosing instead to save millions by resting massive structures directly on shifting desert sand or unstable reclaimed land. Music, ticking clock, high tension. And yet, just months ago, a rogue expat investor walked into a high-stakes, court-ordered public auction in the Dubai International Financial Center. He aggressively bid $190 million to buy the entire iconic tower, won the auction against the city's biggest real estate syndicates, and then completely vanished without paying a single dollar. He has never fully explained his actions. He has never been criminally charged. And the legendary tower he tried to hijack is now desperately being converted into 38 ultra-luxury mega condominiums. Music, dramatic bass drop. Music, driving, data-heavy electronic beat. The real story begins during the initial Dubai property boom, when an ambitious international construction syndicate acquired a bizarrely shaped, razor-thin plot of land, right where 2 major multi-lane expressways cross at a sharp, oblique angle in the shadow of downtown. The plot was a hyper-compressed wedge of sand, narrowing to a literal point at the northern tip that was barely 2 meters wide. By every conventional engineering and real estate standard in the Gulf, the lot was completely unbuildable. A standard rectangular tower on a triangular site would waste enormous amounts of premium road frontage. Most institutional developers took one look at the blueprints and walked away. But this group didn't. They hired a celebrated British structural architect known for master planning massive global exhibitions, a man who simply did not care for small ideas. He looked at the impossible triangle, decided to embrace the aerodynamic geometry, and designed a 22-story, 87-meter-tall tower that matched the sharp wedge of the lot exactly. Every single floor plate would be a perfect triangle, tapering down to a razor-thin prow where the luxury, high-speed traffic converged. The local trade press immediately branded it the Prow Folly. Critics and rival engineers openly predicted that the intense thermal expansion from 50 degrees Celsius some mere heat, combined with the vortex winds blowing off the Arabian Gulf, would literally crack the tower's facade or destabilize it before the decade was out. Music, low, ominous sub-bass. The skepticism wasn't groundless. A 22-story tower balanced on a 2-meter-wide edge, built in an era when regional high-rise engineering was still in its infancy and long before modern supertalls dominated the skyline, sounded like a financial and structural suicide mission. What the critics didn't understand, and what nobody outside the architect's office realized, was how this tower was going to be held up. It wasn't going to rely on standard, thick, concrete shear walls alone. I want to pause and ask you something right here, because if you're tracking this data, it's worth thinking about. If every single expert around you insisted your project would fail, and you were the one risking hundreds of millions on the line, would you trust the mainstream consensus? Or would you trust the raw physics of the engineering? Tell me in the comments. I read every single one. The reason I ask is that this tower was the ultimate answer to that question. The architect bypassed standard shallow friction piles completely. Instead, he forced the drilling rigs deep past the shifting sand, deep past the water table, driving the heavy steel-reinforced foundations directly into the ancient, solid calcarenite bedrock beneath the Dubai crust. The tower was literally bolted to the planet. Music, energetic, triumphant surge. Music, sharp, investigative rhythm. The engineering choice to anchor directly into solid bedrock was the only reason the tower survived what came next. The wind issue the critics warned about turned out to be completely real. Just not in the way they predicted. The razor-sharp prow of the building acted like a vertical airplane wing. When high-velocity desert winds swept down the surrounding highway corridors, they smashed into the point of the triangle, creating a massive downdraft vortex at ground level. In the early days of Dubai's luxury expansion, this had a highly unusual social consequence. The localized microclimate created mini tornadoes of sand and dust that swirled aggressively around the base, frequently blowing away the designer sunglasses and tailored linen jackets of wealthy expats walking into nearby high-end cafes. Security guards spent half their shifts clearing the chaotic dust devils from the luxury entrance, shouting at tourists to move along. But while this historic wedge stood perfectly rigid, the rest of the city's rapid development started exposing a terrifying systemic parallel. Music drop into dark, industrial drone. Almost every modern engineering disaster we investigate on this channel comes down to a single fatal flaw, ignoring what lies beneath the surface. Look at the modern landscape of the region. Right now, in the ultra-luxury sectors of the marina and the outer fronds of reclaimed island projects, developers are fighting a silent, multi-billion-dollar war against physics. When you build massive, heavy concrete towers on reclaimed land or shifting coastal sand, without anchoring to bedrock, you are gambling with time. Over the last decade, multiple luxury towers have experienced severe saltwater intrusion, where the highly corrosive water table of the Gulf slowly eats away at the underground foundations. We've seen high-profile skyscrapers suffer from glass fatigue and microshifting because the ground beneath them settles unevenly. The building starts to lean, just by a few centimeters, but it's enough to warp the structural window frames, causing multi-million-dollar glass panels to spontaneously shatter and rain down onto the supercar parking lots below. While this 100-year grade bedrock foundation remains perfectly level 2 miles away, a brand new $300 million luxury residential tower is currently sitting completely abandoned. The developer tried to save an estimated $6 million by using a localized soil improvement technique instead of driving deep piles to bedrock. The tower began to lean before the interior fit-outs were even completed. It is the ultimate cautionary tale of Gulf real estate. One architect trusted the bedrock, the other trusted a spreadsheet. Music, tense transition. Music, cinematic, high-stakes finance track. The historic triangular tower survived the wild swings of the global economy, transitioning from an iconic corporate headquarters housing high-end media agencies and multinational energy firms into a dark, empty monument caught in a brutal legal war. By 2019, the primary corporate tenants packed up and left, citing the astronomical costs of modernizing the aging building's internal cooling infrastructure to meet modern corporate standards. The tower was owned by a fragmented consortium of international luxury developers, corporate funds, and a stubborn minority stakeholder who flatly refused to agree to an ultra-luxury residential condominium conversion. The deadlock dragged on for years. The iconic structure sat completely vacant on one of the most visible, high-traffic commercial corners in the entire city. Finally, a Dubai court, exasperated by the perpetual gridlock, issued a drastic order. The tower would be sold off at a forced public auction to the highest bidder. Which brings us back to the chaotic events of March 2023. And the second question I want you to honestly consider. When you enter a government-sanctioned financial auction to buy a skyscraper worth over $100 million, what kind of bulletproof, financial proof should the auction house require from you before you lift your paddle? Hold your answer, because the massive loophole in this specific public auction is the reason the entire deal imploded. Music, pulse pounding, fast-paced rhythm. The auction room inside the DIFC was packed with representatives from the region's largest sovereign wealth funds and private equity firms. The bidding quickly escalated past $150 million. Suddenly, An unknown expat developer named Jacob Garlick stepped forward, claiming to represent a U.S.-backed venture capital firm. He confidently raised the bid to a staggering $190 million. The room went dead silent. The hammer fell. Garlick had officially bought one of the most famous pieces of real estate in the city. Under the strict terms of the auction, he had exactly 10 business days to wire a 10% deposit, $19 million, to formalize the transaction. The money never arrived. For 2 weeks, Garlick's legal team issued frantic public statements, blaming a compliance glitch between major international banks, presenting unverified, redacted financial statements showing global assets in Aspen and Napa. The owner's lawyers immediately saw through the smoke and mirrors. The names on the accounts were blacked out, and the asset valuations were completely unproven. The deadline expired, and the entire $190 million sale collapsed into a farce. Speculation exploded across the Dubai real estate market. Institutional insiders alleged that Garlick was secretly working in tandem with the rogue minority stakeholder to intentionally bid up the price, forcing the main developers to either overpay or absorb the massive legal costs of delaying the conversion. While the fraud lawsuits are still aggressively moving through the courts, Garlick has completely vanished from the public eye. Music. Dark, cold synth hit. Music. Heavy, conclusive bass theme. The second public auction went live weeks later. The original major stakeholder swept back in, securing the building for $161 million, nearly $29 million less than Garlick's phantom bid. Today, the high-stakes conversion is actively underway. A consortium of top-tier developers has backed the project with a massive $357 million construction loan to transform the historic shell into 38 ultra-exclusive luxury condominiums. The engineering scale of this renovation is staggering, replacing over 1,000 specialized heat-reflective windows, restoring thousands of custom exterior tiles, and fixing a crumbling upper cornice. For the first time in its entire history, an integrated LED lighting matrix will illuminate the sharp architectural wedge against the night sky. But look at the broader macro data. During a previous severe global economic downturn, this exact tower reportedly changed hands for a microscopic fraction of its current valuation. Yet, it survived. It weathered every financial crash, every property bubble, and every intense summer heat cycle the region could throw at it. Which brings us back to the core argument of this investigative file. This channel has covered dozens of architectural failures across the globe. Almost every single one of them is a tragedy of cutting corners beneath the soil line. This tower is the ultimate counterexample. It stands perfectly level after decades because an architect chose to drill into bedrock, while modern multi-million-dollar pencil towers built on soft sand are currently locked in endless litigation over structural shifting and sinking foundations. So, knowing what you know now about the physics of the bedrock and the chaos of the phantom bid, I leave you with this final question. If you had $200 million to invest in Dubai luxury real estate, would you buy a penthouse in this legendary bedrock and cord icon? Or would you gamble your money on a brand new super tall where the engineering is still being argued in court? Tell me where you land. We open the file.